My name is Evelyn Marlowe, but most people call me Evie. At 65, I thought I'd earned the right to live my golden years in peace. After decades of teaching art history at Columbia University and curating exhibitions that made headlines, I finally decided it was time for me to step back. I bought a cozy little cottage by Lake Champlain, a place where I could paint watercolors, write memoirs, and watch the sun set over the Adirondacks without interruptions. It was supposed to be my sanctuary. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. That's where she comes in, my daughter-in-law, Celeste Hawthorne. She's 32, polished to perfection, and about as genuine as a counterfeit Picasso. Celeste married my son Harrison 5 years ago, and while she charmed everyone else with her designer dresses and perfectly coiffed hair, I always sensed something off about her. Maybe it was the way she smiled too wide or laughed a little too loudly whenever money was mentioned. Whatever it was, it set my instincts on edge. And now, those instincts were screaming louder than ever because I'd started noticing strange things happening around my finances. Documents went missing, bank statements showed odd withdrawals, and worst of all, someone had tampered with the deed to my lake house. I didn't want to believe Celeste would stoop so low as to sabotage my retirement plans, but the evidence kept piling up. One evening, during one of our awkward family dinners, she casually dropped a comment that sent chills down my spine. "You know, Evie," she said, swirling her wine glass like some kind of villain in a soap opera, "it might make more sense for you to sell the lake house and invest the proceeds into Harrison's architecture firm. Think of how much he could accomplish with your help." The audacity of her words hit me like a slap across the face. My hard-earned savings weren't meant to fund their lavish lifestyle. They were mine, damn it. But instead of blowing up right there at the table, I bit my tongue and played along. I smiled sweetly and told her I'd think about it. Deep down, though, I knew I couldn't trust her. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone in my study, flipping through old photo albums. Memories of my late husband, Arthur, flooded back. He was the one who taught me how to handle difficult people. "Always keep your cards close to your chest," he used to say. Well, Celeste wasn't going to get the better of me. Not if I had anything to do with it. I decided then and there that I needed to dig deeper, and maybe even call in a few favors from my past. The next morning, I woke up determined to uncover the truth. First stop? My old Rolodex. Over the years, I'd built quite the network of contacts. Former students, colleagues, museum directors, and even a few hackers who owed me favors. One name stood out. Julian Cross, a brilliant but reclusive tech genius who once helped me recover stolen artwork data from a cyber attack. He owed me big time, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to collect. I called him, explaining the situation carefully without revealing too much. To my relief, Julian agreed to meet me discreetly at a cafe in the city later that week. In the meantime, I started gathering evidence. I reviewed every document I could find, cross-referencing dates and amounts. The unauthorized withdrawals were small enough not to raise suspicion initially, but they added up to thousands of dollars. Whoever was behind this knew exactly what they were doing. Then came the real kicker. I found a draft email in my trash folder addressed to Celeste from an unknown sender. Attached was a detailed breakdown of my assets, including the estimated value of my lake house. How did she get access to this information? My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was war. Meeting Julian was like stepping into a spy movie. He arrived wearing a hoodie pulled low over his face, carrying a sleek laptop case. We sat in the corner of the cafe, far away from prying eyes. "All right, Evie," he said, typing furiously on his keyboard. "Let's see what we're dealing with here." Within minutes, he traced the source of the suspicious activity to an offshore account linked to Celeste's maiden name. Bingo. Not only had she been siphoning money from my accounts, but she'd also been funneling it into investments tied to her own family's shady business dealings. Julian whistled under his breath. "This is bad news, Evie. Really bad. If anyone finds out about this, she's toast." I nodded grimly. Part of me wanted to march straight to Harrison and show him everything, but I knew better. Celeste had him wrapped around her finger, and he'd never believe me unless I had irrefutable proof. So we devised a plan. Julian would continue monitoring her digital footprint while I worked on gathering physical evidence. Meanwhile, I reached out to another trusted ally, an old friend named Margaret Maggie Donnelly, a retired lawyer known for her sharp wit and sharper tongue. Together, we began drafting a new will, ensuring my assets would be protected no matter what happened next. As the days passed, Celeste grew bolder. She started showing up unannounced at my apartment, pretending to be concerned about my well-being. "Are you sure you don't need any help moving into the lake house?" she asked one afternoon, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It must be such a hassle for you to manage everything on your own." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Instead, I smiled politely and assured her I had everything under control. Inside, however, I was seething. Did she really think I was that naive? Things came to a head during Thanksgiving dinner at Harrison and Celeste's penthouse. Everything seemed normal at first. The turkey was juicy, the cranberry sauce homemade, and the conversation light. But then Celeste turned to me and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Evie, darling, are you sure you're making the best decision with the lake house? It seems awfully remote for someone your age. Wouldn't you rather stay closer to us?" Her tone was patronizing, her smile razor-sharp. For a moment, I considered throwing my glass of red wine in her smug face. But instead, I leaned back in my chair, folded my napkin neatly, and replied, "Celeste, dear, I appreciate your concern, but I think I'll manage just fine." The room fell silent. Even Harrison looked uncomfortable. Little did they know the real fireworks were yet to come. Thanksgiving marked a turning point. From that day forward, I stopped pretending to play nice. Every interaction with Celeste became a chess match, each move calculated and deliberate. I let slip hints that I suspected foul play, watching closely for her reaction. Sure enough, she started getting nervous, her usual composure cracking like thin ice. During one particularly tense phone call, she accused me of being paranoid and suggested I see a therapist. Oh, the irony. Meanwhile, Julian uncovered something even more damning. Celeste wasn't just targeting me. She was involved in a larger scheme involving embezzlement and fraud. Apparently, her family had been using her connections to launder money through various shell companies. This revelation changed everything. Suddenly, my personal vendetta felt bigger than just protecting my retirement. It was about exposing corruption and holding someone accountable. With Maggie's guidance, I prepared a dossier containing all the evidence we'd gathered. It was time to bring Celeste's house of cards crashing down. But before I could strike, I needed to ensure I had Harrison on my side, or at least neutralized. Family loyalty ran deep, and I knew losing him would hurt more than anything else. Still, sacrifices had to be made. Justice demanded it. The confrontation with Celeste happened sooner than I anticipated. One chilly December afternoon, she showed up at my apartment uninvited, her designer coat dusted with snowflakes and her lips pressed into a thin line. "We need to talk," she announced, brushing past me without waiting for an invitation. I closed the door behind her and crossed my arms, bracing myself for whatever storm she was about to unleash. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know you've been digging around, Evie," she said, pacing the living room like a caged animal. "And let me tell you something, you're playing a dangerous game. You have no idea who you're messing with." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the confidence she tried so hard to project. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then calmly I replied, "Oh, Celeste, I think I have a pretty good idea." From my desk drawer, I pulled out a folder containing copies of the incriminating documents Julian had uncovered. As she flipped through them, her face went pale. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes, and it gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. But Celeste wasn't one to go down without a fight. Over the next few days, she launched a smear campaign against me, whispering poisonous lies to anyone who would listen. At first, I dismissed it as petty gossip, until I noticed the subtle shifts in how people treated me. Friends stopped returning my calls, acquaintances avoided eye contact at social events, and even Harrison seemed distant when I mentioned moving forward with legal action. It was maddening watching her manipulate everyone around me while maintaining her pristine image. Determined not to let her win, I doubled down on my efforts. With Julian's help, I anonymously tipped off the authorities about Celeste's illegal activities. Within days, investigators began circling her family's businesses, asking questions and seizing records. The tension in the air was palpable, like the calm before a hurricane. Meanwhile, I finalized my new will, ensuring that my assets would be distributed according to my wishes, not hers. Every signature felt like another nail in her coffin. Yet, despite my resolve, a small part of me wondered if revenge was worth the toll it was taking on my relationships and my soul. Things reached a breaking point during Christmas Eve dinner at Harrison and Celeste's penthouse. What should have been a joyful celebration turned into a battlefield. Celeste, desperate to regain control, decided to make her move in front of the entire family. Midway through dessert, she stood up dramatically and declared, "Evie, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room. Your behavior lately has been concerning. Between your erratic decisions and your refusal to consider our advice, I can't help but worry about your mental health." Gasps rippled through the room as everyone turned to look at me. My heart pounded, but I refused to back down. "Concerning?" I echoed, rising slowly from my chair. "Is that what you call stealing from me? Framing it as concern for my well-being while you drain my accounts and destroy my reputation?" Pulling out the dossier, I slammed it onto the table. "Here's proof of everything you've done, Celeste. Illegal transactions, forged documents, embezzlement. The list goes on. If you think I'm going to sit quietly and let you ruin my life, you're sorely mistaken." The room erupted into chaos as accusations flew back and forth. Harrison looked torn between disbelief and anger, his loyalty caught in the crossfire. By the end of the night, alliances were fractured and trust was shattered beyond repair. In the aftermath of that disastrous dinner, I retreated to my lake house, seeking solace in its quiet isolation. Celeste, cornered and desperate, lashed out in ways I hadn't anticipated. She hired a high-profile lawyer to counter my claims, spinning tales of how I was bitter and vindictive, using my age as a shield to deflect blame. Worse still, she managed to sway public opinion by portraying herself as the victim of an elderly woman's paranoia. Even some of my closest friends began questioning whether I'd lost my grip on reality. It hurt more than I cared to admit. But instead of crumbling under the pressure, I channeled my pain into action. Julian and Maggie worked tirelessly to strengthen my case, uncovering additional evidence that painted Celeste in an even darker light. Finally, after weeks of preparation, I called a meeting with key figures, including Harrison, Celeste, and their attorney, to present irrefutable proof of her crimes. The moment I laid out the timeline of her deceit, her facade crumbled completely. Tears streamed down her face as she begged for mercy, but it was too late. Justice had been set in motion and there was no turning back now. By early spring, the legal proceedings against Celeste were well underway. Her once impeccable reputation lay in ruins, exposed for the fraud it truly was. Investigators uncovered connections between her family's business dealings and several high-profile scandals, leading to arrests and asset freezes. Celeste lost access to her trust fund overnight, leaving her penniless and powerless. Watching her fall from grace filled me with a strange mix of triumph and sadness. This wasn't the happy ending I'd envisioned. It felt hollow, like biting into chocolate only to find it filled with ash. Still, I couldn't deny the relief that washed over me as I settled into my lake house. The peace I'd dreamed of finally seemed within reach. Each morning, I woke up to the sound of bird song and the sight of sunlight dancing across the water. I spent my days painting landscapes, writing letters to old friends, and reflecting on the choices that had brought me here. Yet beneath the surface of contentment lingered a nagging question. Had I become the very thing I despised? Was my quest for justice merely vengeance in disguise? Harrison's visits grew sporadic, his demeanor guarded whenever he came to see me. He never outright accused me of wrongdoing, but the distance between us spoke volumes. "Mom, I just don't understand why it had to go this far," he said during one particularly tense conversation. "Couldn't you have handled things differently?" His words stung not because they were untrue but because they echoed my own doubts. I wanted to explain, to make him see that I'd done what I thought was necessary, but pride kept me silent. Instead, I handed him a letter I'd written, hoping it might bridge the gap between us someday. In the meantime, I threw myself into my art. My paintings gained attention at a local gallery exhibition, where strangers marveled at the raw emotion captured on canvas. Critics praised my work for its honesty and depth, though few realized the turmoil that inspired it. Fame brought validation, but it couldn't fill the void left by strained relationships. Nights were the hardest, lying awake and wondering if I'd made the right choice. Sometimes I imagined apologizing to Celeste, offering her a chance to start over. But deep down I knew forgiveness wasn't possible, not yet anyway. Just when I thought the worst was behind me, Celeste struck one last blow. Through her lawyer, she threatened to expose secrets from my past. Secrets I'd buried long ago and hoped would stay buried forever. Apparently, during her frantic search for leverage, She'd uncovered details about a controversial decision I'd made decades earlier regarding a stolen artwork scandal. If revealed, it could tarnish not only my legacy but also the lives of those I loved. For a moment, panic gripped me. How dare she use my past against me? But then I remembered something Arthur used to say: the truth may hurt, but lies will kill you. With Julian's assistance, I gathered evidence proving that Celeste had orchestrated similar schemes in the past, implicating her in crimes far worse than anything I'd ever done. Armed with this knowledge, I sent her a simple message: if you expose me, I'll expose you. Silence followed. Whatever response she planned, it never came. For the first time in months, I slept soundly knowing I'd won, for better or worse. Winter gave way to spring, and with it came a fragile sense of normalcy, or at least as close to normal as I could manage. Celeste had vanished from public life altogether, retreating into obscurity after her legal troubles spiraled out of control. Rumors circulated that she'd fled the country, but no one knew for sure. Harrison, caught between guilt and anger, tried to mend our fractured relationship. He visited me more often now, bringing coffee and pastries on weekends, though his smiles felt forced, like he was trying too hard to make everything okay again. One afternoon, as we sat by the lake sipping tea, he finally broached the subject neither of us wanted to discuss. "Mom," he began hesitantly, "do you think maybe someday you and Celeste could find a way to forgive each other?" The question hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. I set my cup down carefully, choosing my words with precision. "Forgiveness isn't something you demand, Harrison. It's earned, and sometimes it's impossible." His shoulders slumped, defeated. We didn't speak much after that, letting the quiet fill the space between us. As much as I loved my son, I couldn't pretend everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. A month later, I received devastating news. Julian Cross, my tech-savvy ally and confidant, had passed away suddenly. According to his obituary, it was a heart attack. A cruel twist of fate for someone who seemed invincible. I attended his small, understated funeral alone, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers I'd picked near the lake. Standing there among strangers, I realized how fleeting alliances could be. Julian had been instrumental in helping me take down Celeste, yet now he was gone, leaving behind only memories of late-night phone calls and cryptic emails. That night, back at the lake house, I poured myself a glass of red wine and stared at the fire crackling in the hearth. Julian's death reminded me of how interconnected we all are, and how quickly those connections can sever. For the first time, I allowed myself to grieve not just for him, but for everything I'd lost in this battle. Trust, innocence, peace of mind. The victory I'd fought so hard for felt bittersweet, like biting into an apple only to discover it was rotten at the core. I wondered if Julian would have approved of the lengths I'd gone to, if he'd still see me as the same Evie Marlowe who had once helped him recover stolen data. As summer approached, loneliness crept in like ivy overtaking a crumbling wall. Friends drifted further away, deterred by lingering whispers about my feud with Celeste. Margaret Donnelly, my stalwart lawyer and friend, remained loyal, but even she had her limits. "You've won, Evie," she told me during one of our rare phone calls. "Now it's time to let go before you lose yourself completely." Her words stung because they rang true. Despite my efforts to move on, bitterness clung to me like a second skin, tainting every interaction and decision. I tried distracting myself with hobbies, painting vibrant sunsets, writing essays about art history, but nothing filled the void left by broken relationships. Nights were the hardest. I'd sit by the window, staring at the stars reflected on the lake surface, wondering if Celeste ever looked up at the same sky. Did she regret what she'd done? Or did she blame me entirely? These questions haunted me, keeping sleep at bay. Slowly, the isolation became unbearable. I started questioning whether revenge had truly been worth the cost of losing everyone I cared about, including parts of myself. Then one rainy afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at my doorstep. She introduced herself as Lila Hartman, a former colleague of Julian's whom I'd never met. Dressed in a trench coat dripping with rainwater, she carried an envelope bearing Julian's handwriting. My stomach churned as I invited her inside, dread pooling in my chest. "Julian asked me to deliver this to you in case anything happened to him," she explained, handing over the envelope. Inside was a letter and a flash drive labeled for Evie. The letter was short but chilling. "Evie, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. There's something you need to know, something about your own actions years ago. Don't judge yourself too harshly. We all have shadows we'd rather keep hidden. But remember, truth has a way of finding its way to the light. Take care of yourself. J. My hands trembled as I inserted the flash drive into my laptop. What I found shocked me to my core. Evidence linking me to a decades-old scandal involving the illegal sale of a priceless painting. Julian hadn't judged me for it, he'd simply ensured I couldn't deny it any longer. For hours, I sat frozen in front of the screen, grappling with the implications of Julian's revelation. The scandal had been buried so deeply, I'd convinced myself it was ancient history, irrelevant to my present life. Yet here it was, staring back at me, undeniable proof that I wasn't as morally superior as I'd believed. Had Celeste known about this? Was it why she'd threatened to expose my secrets? Or was it merely coincidence that Julian had chosen this moment to remind me of my own flaws? The weight of it all pressed down on me like a lead blanket. I thought about the choices I'd made, not just recently but throughout my life, and how they'd shaped the person I'd become. In seeking justice against Celeste, had I crossed ethical lines I swore I'd never touch? Was I really so different from her? These questions gnawed at me, leaving me restless and uneasy. That night I wrote a journal entry titled, "The Price of Vengeance." Beneath it I scribbled a single sentence: "Justice without mercy is cruelty." For the first time I understood what it meant. Autumn returned, painting the landscape in hues of gold and crimson. By then I'd made a decision. I needed to leave Lake Champlain behind. Living there felt like being trapped in amber, preserved but stagnant. So I donated most of my belongings to charity, packed a suitcase with essentials and booked a one-way ticket to Europe. My plan was simple: travel aimlessly, seeking redemption and closure wherever I could find them. Maybe I'd write a book about my experiences, or perhaps I'd simply disappear into anonymity. Either way, I knew staying put would destroy me. On my last morning in the lake house, I walked along the shore, trailing my fingers through the cool water. Memories of Arthur flooded back. The laughter, the arguments, the quiet moments shared under starlit skies. He'd always said life was about learning, growing, and letting go. I hoped he'd be proud of me for taking this step, even if it felt terrifying. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shadow, I whispered a silent goodbye to the life I was leaving behind. Then, with a final glance at the cottage, I climbed into my car and drove toward the airport. Months later, while wandering through a quaint village in Provence, I encountered Celeste. She worked as a waitress in a cafe overlooking a cobblestone square, her designer clothes replaced by a faded apron and scuffed shoes. When she saw me, recognition flickered across her face, followed by a mixture of fear and shame. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she approached me, her voice trembling. "Evie, I didn't expect to see you here." I studied her, searching for traces of the woman who'd once tormented me. Gone was the polished facade. In its place stood someone humbled, weary, and unmistakably broken. "Celeste," I replied softly, "neither did I." We talked briefly, exchanging fragments of our lives since our last encounter. She apologized, not for her crimes but for the pain she'd caused. I nodded, accepting her words without judgment. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it was necessary, for both of us. Afterward, as I watched her return to work, I realized something profound. Vengeance may grant temporary satisfaction, but healing requires compassion, even for those who hurt us most. My journey continued long after that chance meeting. From Paris to Prague, Venice to Vienna, I wandered through cities steeped in history, marveling at their beauty and resilience. Along the way, I wrote letters to Harrison, apologizing for the role I'd played in fracturing our relationship. Some days I painted scenes of bustling markets and serene cathedrals. Others I simply sat by riversides, sketchbook in hand, reflecting on the complexities of human nature. Eventually, I settled in a small coastal town in Portugal, where the ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. It was here that I finished my memoir, titling it Shadows and Light. In the final chapter, I wrote about the lessons I'd learned: that justice must be tempered with mercy, that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, and that true peace comes not from winning battles but from understanding our shared humanity. As I closed the book, I glanced out at the sea, feeling a strange mix of sorrow and hope. Life had taught me hard truths, but it had also shown me grace. And though scars remained, I embraced them as reminders of my journey, not as wounds to hide but as stories to share.